This B Podcast Network show is presented by IXL. IXL's all-inclusive online teaching and learning platform simplifies edtech needs and accelerates achievement in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. IXL delivers personalized learning across a comprehensive pre-K-12 curriculum, including math, language arts, science, and social studies, and it helps you assess student performance through actionable real-time insights at every level of your school or district. This one solution performs work that typically requires dozens of different tools. Want to find out why so many leading districts trust IXL? Visit ixl.com/BE. That's ixl.com/BE. We're proud to be sponsored by MyFlex Learning. MyFlex Learning is a scheduling platform that helps middle and high schools meet the individual needs of all students. Schools can easily create and manage time for flex blocks, win time, activity periods, RTI, counselor and teacher appointments, and much more. And with its built-in accountability tool and reporting features, MyFlex Learning solves your challenges around getting kids where they need to be and understanding how flex time is spent. Make your flex time work for you. Visit myflexlearning.com/BE to learn more and receive $500 off the first year. That's myflexlearning.com/BE.
Getting clear on your college's messaging, telling your brand's story, and should your college start a podcast? Why or why not? And what should you talk about if you even do? These are all the things we cover in this episode with Ross Romano of September Strategies. Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping higher ed marketers tell better stories, create better content, and enroll more students. My name is John Azoni. I'm the founder at Unveiled. We're a video production company working specifically with college marketing teams on automating their video storytelling content through a subscription approach. You can learn more at unveiled.tv. That's UNVEILD. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, go ahead and subscribe. And if you've been listening for a while now and haven't left a review, I'd love for you to do that. My guest today is Ross Romano from September Strategies. And so in keeping with the streak I have going on here of having guests on from outside the literal higher ed bubble, Ross brings us wisdom from working with companies in the K through 12 space. September Strategies helps organizations and high-performing leaders in the K through 12 education industry communicate their vision and make strategic decisions that lead to long-term success. And I wanted to have him on because he's a well-respected thought leader in the education space in general, and I was intrigued by what September Strategies is about, but also I was intrigued by the fact that he's the co-founder of the B Podcasting Network, which is a network of podcasts in the education space, because I've connected with more than one person lately that's either starting a podcast at their school or wants to start a podcast at their school. And so I think this is a really relevant topic. And by more than one person, I mean two people. Two people, though, basically qualifies me to be like an influencer and say, everybody's been asking me, so I just figured I would just make an episode about it. Anyway, let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Ross Romano of September Strategies. We are here with Ross Romano from September Strategies. Ross, thanks for being here today.
Hey, John, thanks so much for having me.
So tell me what September Strategies is.
Yeah, excellent. So we are a consulting firm that works almost exclusively with organizations in the K-12 space. Sometimes we go a little bit beyond that, but we're all in the learning world with any type of company or organization that serves schools, right? So we work on overall management strategy, as well as storytelling, marketing and sales strategies, and kind of that whole picture of helping a company define and then communicate its vision and go out there and connect with the people they want to connect with.
Cool. I like it. So how did you get to where you are? You told me that you were sort of in the higher ed industry for a little while, or you have worked in higher ed at some point?
Yeah, so I have a history over the past several years of having done PR and marketing work in the education field and have worked somewhat in the higher ed a little bit. I've been primarily K-12, but when appropriate and relevant, we've kind of expanded some of our projects into the higher ed field, particularly with companies that are serving universities and colleges, and when those principles are underlying, right? Because there's some pretty significant differences between K-12 and higher ed, and yet there's other things that are universal across the education spectrum, and particularly when it comes to highlighting student success and understanding the support that educators need, right? And these foundational principles that we'll talk about today around storytelling and communications.
So tell me how September Strategies works. So it says you work with high performing leaders. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Yeah. So we're working with, founders and C-level leaders of these companies. So, just to put a little more definition around what these organizations are, it's ed tech companies, it's publishers, it's PD providers, right? It's nonprofits, it's all these various organizations that are providing products, services, support to schools and school districts and educators, right? So we're working with the leaders there, whether it be the founder, whether it be the rest of the C-level. And the way I describe it is we work from vision to decision, right? And what that means is we help to identify, define, and articulate the leader's vision for that company, what they're trying to achieve, what are the goals, what are our values, and then ensure that there's sound decision-making with fidelity to that the vision, right? So we don't see that as just, mission, vision, and values as just words that live on your website or in a Google Drive folder somewhere. That really should be the guiding principle on a day-to-day basis, and understanding, okay, where do we have opportunities for new partnerships, for new, product launches or features, for new markets we can serve. And is that consistent with that vision for where we're trying to go? Is our team on the same page there? Are we kind of revisiting that and making sound decisions? We work to kind of form the foundation for success through messaging. A lot of times, even companies that have been around for 20 plus years haven't really engaged in that foundational messaging work of deeply understanding their audience, their pain points, the things they need to know about, right? Being able to stand up those pillars of their communication strategy. So we start there and we work through thought leadership strategy, the various ways we need to get the word out. Sales enablement is a big thing. That's all the collateral materials, whether it be podcasts, case studies, white papers, one-pagers, whatever, right? All that collateral that you want to have at the ready to be able to make those connections to your customers. And then we see it through with strategic advisement and adjustment as we go. It's not just a situation where we create a bunch of stuff, drop it off to the client and say, here you go, good luck. I mean, we really are working to say, okay, are we using these things? Are we maximizing it? And that's something that I learned a lot from earlier in my career, where I would do similar type of work with clients and then realize whatever happened to that stuff, right? We did all that messaging work and their website doesn't have any new messaging on it. Or, one of the biggest things being those silos that exist in organizations where, hey, you've contracted with a marketing firm or a PR firm, but your sales reps don't know that. So your CEO was just quoted in some article today, and your sales rep had a meeting today and they didn't know about it to bring it up to say, hey, did you know that our CEO was just featured over, all of those things to say, look, that's the overall strategy, right? And that's why it's critical to not just leave them with the things and walk away, but to really say, look, everything doesn't work the right way the first time. You adjust it, you evolve, you adapt. And so that's what we try to do.
I love that. I'm laughing because I've just been there. As a business owner, I've been there in terms of like putting all this work into something and then it just sits on the shelf because I get busy with something else, putting all this work into, like you said, I mean, I don't really do white papers, but that type of stuff, that kind of collateral.
Right. The same thing applies to video, right? Because I heard one of your previous episodes. Okay, we create these videos and then they just kind of pop them up on YouTube and they didn't do anything else. Okay, well, right, you have to continue to utilize that collateral, leverage it to your benefit. It's only as good as the people who see it. So, that's kind of part of that is just trial and error and learning from experience and seeing where those things sometimes fall apart and then being persistent and saying, look, it's actually really important that you do this and kind of seeing that through.
Yeah, I think there's some comfort though in that like sameness across a lot of organizations just have trouble starting something but then seeing it through. I think it's just
Right.
pretty much everywhere I've worked in my career, in video production, and also I worked with nonprofit. Same thing. It's like big idea. Everyone's excited about it. We have 10 meetings about it. We do the thing like a little bit, and then we get swept up into something else, and it's like, whatever happened to that? But it is so
Right.
helpful to have someone, an organization like you guys, just saying, hey, like, let's stay on track here. Let's see this through to the end. See if it works. Like, get to the point where it either worked or it didn't work. I think a lot of organizations don't even get to the point where they know if it worked or not.
Right. Right. Well, that happens a lot.
Yeah. Cool. So tell me, I want to go back to the messaging that you guys do. We talk a lot about messaging and differentiating, for us higher ed institutions, differentiating their schools. And when you work with companies in the education space, what are some of those conversations like? What's the process that you take people through to develop their messaging?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I've taken to saying recently is that, the difference between a great product and a great company is a great story. Right? And because I've seen it all over the spectrum where the best products aren't necessarily the ones that are winning in the marketplace.
Right.
Sometimes it's just because there's competitors that are super well funded and they could just buy up market share and kind of work backwards from there. But a lot of times it's just that there's a disconnect between the product, its features, and the product vision, or how it actually relates to the customer. So where I start is always with the consumer. Of course, in education, a lot of times that is students, it is parents, it is educators, it's administrators. If it's a product you're selling to a school district, of course, that's the administration. But those are all audiences that either are the direct or an influencer audience. So we start right there and go down and identify what are their pain points? What do they need? What do they want? What are their ambitions? What do they aspire to, right? It's not strictly deficit minded around things that are challenges, but it's also like what it really gets them going. What do they want out of an organization that's supposed to be helping them, and really dive into that. Oftentimes, I will then take that, develop initial draft messaging around the value proposition, and then stress test it by going out and talking to people that are actually in those roles and saying, look, if a company is talking about this, this, and this, how does that resonate with you? What would that mean to you? Does that speak to the things that you actually care about? And then we find from there, okay, yes, we're on the right track here, or no, we need to go and make some adjustments. One of the big things as far as kind of what happens too often, the status quo, is that, and companies do this a lot, especially if they are, the founding team is more from the product side, overemphasis on features, right? Relates to what you were just mentioning, where you just get overloaded, you get bombarded. There's all these things that sound great up front, but then you realize you can't actually use them all or figure them out, or it just becomes too much. And it's not really motivating you as a customer to say, I need to commit to this and stick with it because I see the outcomes, right? There's over promising of uniqueness. Everything is revolutionary. Everything is, and there's these overused terms, innovative, creative. In education, one of the terms that gets overused a lot, that to the point of becoming a cliche, is equity. Not because it's not critically important, but because companies just throw it out there because they know they're supposed to say it. And they don't actually define, in the case of their solution, what they are doing to make a true impact on that so that it has meaning. And then it just becomes these words that everybody's using. Companies that haven't necessarily spent a lot of time paying attention to who are their competitors in the space, or they're defining their competitors way too narrowly, right? Like, nobody does exactly the same thing we do, so that means we're the only ones. Well,
right.
No, because again, focus on the outcomes, focus on the audience. What are the things they want to achieve, and what are other companies that are setting out to help them achieve that? And then how are you describing yourself in contrast maybe with those other solutions, right? And so, it's all of those various things that we start with and kind of really strip out those cliches, take it down to the foundation and the roots, and then usually try to figure out, okay, what are the 3, 4, 5 tenets or pillars that we're built around? These typically are some type of articulation of the values of the company, but also the value proposition, right? What are the key areas that if somebody's thinking about what we are, they can remember, okay, they help with this, this, and this. And that's why I care about it, right? Because it's all about making them care, planning with the end in mind around the customer and the outcomes that they will achieve if they stick with you. And then finding that sometimes the most aha moment for clients is I'll interview them a couple of times about their product, their company, what they do, and we'll record those conversations, and then I'll go back and review it, and that'll be part of my process as well. Mm-hmm. And then I'll come up with the messaging and say, look, this should sound familiar to you, right? It shouldn't sound like I just made this stuff all up out of nowhere. But also what you'll recognize is that this is distilled and communicated in a way that you've never done before.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times what you realize is you're already doing the things you're supposed to be doing as a company, but you haven't quite tethered it to, the audiences that you need to be tethered to or how you do it. Sometimes you find that you're not doing the right things, and then you need to go back and say, okay, is this actually a good product or not? But a lot of times it's just talking it through really helps to distill those things and companies realize, oh, this is what we need to say about ourselves.
Yeah, and just getting clarity. I find that so many organizations could really benefit from just taking some of the artsiness out of their marketing language and just getting clear about what it is that you do. I had an Instagram ad come across yesterday. It was an Instagram ad for something video related that obviously got served to me. It was a product that actually kind of looked interesting while they were doing it, but the whole ad, like, no one said what the product did, product actually did. It was just people that were like, this is life changing. This is going to change your whole workflow. And I actually emailed them like, I might have bought that from you guys, but I skipped it because you didn't tell me anything. I was like, maybe try again, serve it to me again, but like actually, tell me what you do.
Yeah, it's that push and pull where sometimes I feel like the best way to go about it is to try to develop your unique and almost proprietary definition around a key term that matters, right? Sometimes you'll see it on a website, for example, on the menu. And sometimes it's even a web developer that'll say, well, we don't want the menus to just sound like every website, right? So we come up with our own terms.
Right.
I'm like, well, if I'm navigating that website, how do I know what I want to click on? Because I don't know what any of this means. Yeah. Right. So like you need to use words that people will recognize, but you also need to say why they have meaning to you.
Right. It's like if, 10 different companies made DVD players, they're not all coming up with different play button symbols.
No.
It's like, oh, ours is going to be a circle.
Right. That would be very frustrating. And you would say, I mean, even for me, I've traditionally been a PC user, and then when I switch over to an Apple device, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
Like even that with devices that are not brand new to me and that have been around, it's like, man, this is completely different, and I'm frustrated. So, if you're a new product coming to market and that's the first thing people feel, you probably won't make it very far.
Right. Exactly. And I like that you test the messaging out too, because I think I've been in enough meetings to know that like there's a lot of assumptions that go into branding, and I've just coming up with brands, rebrands. Who are we targeting? What are their pain points? And it's nobody in that room is the actual customer, and so we're just assuming a lot of stuff. And I always find that my assumptions are usually wrong. So when I when I started my company, I wanted to really make sure that I wasn't just assuming what my customers wanted and needing and what their pain points were. And I called a bunch of people, and I was really surprised to learn that like I was like kind of on the right path, but like there were other things that I wasn't saying or that I was saying that wasn't resonating. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just a whole different ballgame when you're just when you're writing on a whiteboard in a bubble. But then when you're actually testing that and validating those findings.
Yeah, and this is why I do think sometimes it's, you know, the way that I go about it and the way that we work is non-traditional in the sense that we're not exclusively like a communications firm, right? Because we're engaging in that strategic advisement and management consulting. And, that earlier in my career when I was more in a, communications and publicity role, and it made me think a lot about the communications really needs to be a two-way process. And a lot of companies think about it as our communications unit is here to figure out what we want to say and say it. And it's a one-way direction versus saying, but they're also the people who are out there engaging with the marketplace, right? So they should also be bringing intelligence back to you and saying, look, this is not resonating. This is, I'm talking to the media and here's the things they care about. And we're not talking about those things. So why not, right? There needs to be that dynamic. So now doing it in this sense, it hopefully helps, to at least illustrate to these to companies that it's not superficial, it's foundational. If you think about the in leadership and companies that became really successful, like a lot of times those leaders they weren't the technical experts, they were the visionaries. The Steve Jobs is Walt Disney, right? Today it would be probably Elon Musk. When you think about what is the thing that he's bringing to his companies, it's that he's going out there and he's telling a story that people find interesting. And they're saying, now he's not the communications person, right? He might be the chief storyteller in a sense, but he's the CEO. But it's because you really need to interconnect those things and not just think about it as, okay, this is something off to the side and let's just, have somebody do that and, and then their job is done.
For sure. Yeah. The face of the company needs to mirror, the back end sort of strategies too. What does it mean to you when you work with a company on their brand story? What does it mean to you to tell a brand story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way I would define it is that a brand story it's your customer's story, right? It's the story of their life and how you fit into their goals and their dreams. And if you can't find that entry point to how you fit in, then why would they care, right?
Yeah.
So in education, I think I mentioned this earlier, your consumers, their students, their parents, their educators. And you're talking about, in the higher ed world, for example, yes, things like campus life and, are important, but ultimately, especially in the current economic climate of I'm making decisions around, okay, tuition is this, and, the jobs outlook is this, and I have these different choices. I need to be hearing about what is my future going to look like, be way past the time when I'm enrolled. What is my financial outlook? What kind of work am I going to be doing? Is it going to be meaningful to me? How am I going to get there? Am I just going to graduate with a diploma and then I get to put that on my resume and I have to go out and find a job? Am I going to be learning about career opportunities and building a network as I go? There's certain things there that I found that community colleges are doing really well compared to a lot of four-year universities, because they understand that they have to demonstrate that value proposition to students and they have to focus on those outcomes. Whereas there's that kind of middle class of four-year universities, especially not the elite schools that people will want to get into no matter what. But also not the, lower cost public schools that are, but it's those ones in the middle that are expensive, but they're not the Ivies. And now they're like, okay, you really need to redefine why should I come there? Because if I'm graduating with a bunch of debt and my job outlook is really no different than if I went to the local state school or, whatever. I mean, there has to be something more to it than just campus life and it's the dining hall and that kind of thing. It has to really, you have to understand me, right? So what are the needs and ambitions? What are their pain points? What are their dreams? How will they be successful? So I think that applies to any company. Of course, we're talking about within education, but it's any tool. I mean, there's obviously a huge surge right now in AI tools in the marketplace, right? And there is a tremendous disparity in how well they are or are not telling any kind of story around their relevance. And so there's a lot of skeptics out there that are doubting them, and there's others that are gaining a lot of user base. But it's because like the tools that I use that incorporate AI, I don't think about them as AI. I think about them as how they help me. Noise cancellation, right? Auto transcription. That's AI, but I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, isn't AI cool? I'm thinking, well, these are things I need in my business. Until they start to really go out there and understand their customer and speak to their needs, there's just, going to be a lot of those shortcomings.
Yeah. And I think that, I talk about like there's kind of two ways that schools use the word storytelling. Really, brands in general use the word telling our story. And there is, there is telling a singular actual story. Like maybe the school comes from a rich heritage history. Some famous guy started it in the Civil War or whatever. Maybe there is a story there. But I think in a lot of cases, what it really is finding what resonates with your students and speaking to those things over time in small, gestures of story and drips of communication. I think, and what I think people get wrong is, a lot of the storytelling types that are beating the storytelling drum will say, oh, tell your story. But I think we need to frame that. And I just think it needs to be tell your customer's story, because people don't care about your story. Like, no, like I'm not going to go to your school because you achieved this or whatever. Like, I care about what's in it for me. I think there just needs to be that shift. It's thinking about your customers being the story, and how are you going to feed into that story with the content that you put out.
Right. And it's not an invention. It should be, proactively talking about things that are already happening, the things that you're doing, the things that, that are happening for your educators, your students, or your customers in another case. If you can't tell that, it means that you're probably not doing the right work, or you're not having the impact you need to have. But a lot of times, it's community engagement. It's getting out there. It's understanding that we do a lot of good things, and we do 9 good things and then one thing that doesn't work out. And, people will hear about that one thing regardless, and they can't contextualize it if that's the only time they hear from us, right? Because they haven't heard about these other things. And you could see that as well, that things like, crisis management, which is another form of this, that is, effective crisis management happens every day is what it is, because it's telling a positive story all the time when there is no crisis. And then, that thing's in context, and it says, okay, this isn't so great, but I do know that all this other stuff is happening. So it's an opportunity for companies and organizations to create a much better relationship to their audience. But, it does require some persistence.
A quick break here, speaking of telling stories and communicating your school's impact, to share with you some thoughts from one of our subscription clients who is the photography and video producer for Baker College here in Michigan.
The video subscription idea was a real godsend for me. It's been kind of life-changing in a way. I don't know if that's too strong of a statement. There's a lot of content to produce and not a lot of content creators here. So having somebody who can take that portion off my plate, it's allowed me a little bit of room to breathe and maybe focus on some other projects. Not only do you get a fully edited testimonial, you also get a delivery of all of the B-roll that was taken of that student. For instance, we have this culinary institute. And one of the projects we wanted to do is to create just a short little video connected to a QR code that on all the little chocolates that we give out in the restaurant, or if they make chocolates for a special event or for our board members or for any meetings or graduation, they can scan this QR code and up pops this video of some like really beautiful slow-mo hands making chocolate and that sort of thing. And I was able to go into this B-roll and find some fantastic shots of one of our students who did a testimonial creating these bonbons and creating cakes, and you've got the batter going and you've got the chocolate drizzling. So I know that I'm going to be able to take that footage, resize it. I can resize it vertically if I need it. I can resize it into a 1x1 if I need it. I can color grade it however I need to fit my needs. And I really don't have to travel across the state to our Culinary Institute to do a whole new shoot, because I've got that B footage at my hands. So really, that's something that I could sit down, edit for a couple of hours, have it done, and check it off the list, which is fantastic.
We love internal video teams here at Unveiled because we know what it's like to be in their shoes. We've been there. We've been those people before. It's a lot of work and it's not enough hands on deck to handle all of the content needs for a whole freaking college. So we're here to make not only the marketing team's lives easier, but the video people's lives easier too, and free up their time to be more productive and do other pressing stuff. So head over to our website, unveiled.tv, that's unveild.tv, and book a call with us. And if you're like me and you want to know how much something costs before you have to talk to a real person, you can go to our pricing page and download our pricing guide, which has obviously pricing and also just like how this whole thing works, FAQs, all that stuff. So go to pricing.unveiled.tv and download that. Okay, now back to my conversation with Ross Romano.
Cool. I want to shift gears and talk about your involvement in podcasting. So you co-founded a podcasting platform. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we are called the B Podcast Network, and it is right now, I think 14 shows and counting. We probably will have a few more signing on very soon, but we are exclusively dedicated to learning and education. So our mission is to support transformative change in formal and informal learning environments. And so the majority of the shows right now are focused on K-12 leadership, educators, but we also have learning and development inside the corporate learning environment, and some that are a little more around parenting or general leadership growth. But it's all kind of in that realm. And, our vision is to catalyze a collaborative community, a lot of C's, but creators, partners, and listeners to rally around the common goal to make change. I call it this like triangle of impact, with the creators, the listeners, and the sponsors, and understanding what are the common challenges that each of those audiences faces with respect to podcasting specifically, and what we can do as a network to help that. Yeah. And then of course their needs overall, but none of this will be super news to you, but as a creator, right, it's a lot of work. It can be isolating because the technology that's out there doesn't necessarily support community. It's hard to know what other people are doing. The average podcast or the median podcast lasts 3 episodes. I think only half of podcast series make it more than 3 episodes, because you start doing it, you realize I don't really know how to build an audience. There's no way to do that natively. This is a lot of work, and I just can't really stick with it, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's something like 1% of podcasts make it to 20 episodes or more. Wow. Because all those challenges. So so that's creators, right? And also, most of our hosts having another day job, being an educator or some other type of role. They're not primarily in it to make money, but that's also nice, right? At least if you're not losing money on it, right? Because there are expenses, costs. So how do we be a part of kind of an organization that helps with that? Because that's not my expertise, is what they might say. For listeners, a lot of the same things apply. With those stats around podcasts that don't really last. One, how can I find something I like? And once I find something, will it keep coming out routinely, or will it go away? Will the quality control be there? Can I get relevant recommendations to me? If I like this, can I get that? Especially in any kind of a niche, because I see this every single day. Our stuff is in the education field. Every time I go on Apple Podcasts, the recommendations below say popular podcast in education, and it has nothing to do with our content. It's Duolingo and it's TED Talks and it's, Mel Robbins and Jordan Peterson or whatever, whatever somebody claims is education. And so if I'm a listener,
Jordan Peterson too, I get that too when I look
right. And it's like, well, this has nothing to do with anything. And yet because you're self-tagging it as education, it's getting pushed at me. And then, for sponsors, each individual show, in the entire ecosystem, let alone niches, but even, shows that are more consumer, the individual audience for one podcast is typically not big enough that I want to spend all of my time dealing with them. And then there's, as far as finding who's relevant to me going out there, I want to work with a group. It's much easier. I get a more comprehensive service. I get to reach the people I want. I get more touch points and more engagement. And I don't have to have a full-time dedicated team whose entire job is going out and discovering podcasts that I might want to partner with. We try to think about it in those terms. And so we do that. And then we also do, part of the thing we're ramping up now being production services for companies that want to do branded podcasts in the space. And that, need support with that. So that's a big growth area. That's something I've done a lot of in my previous life. So we've kind of developed the experience there to create those series as well.
That's great. So who should start? Thinking about higher ed a little bit, what kind of schools should start a podcast? I've been hearing, people that listen to my podcast and friends that I make kind of in this whole industry and stuff like that, some rumblings of like, we want to start a podcast. We're kind of like getting on that train in the higher ed space. If you're a marketing leader or whatever, who should start a podcast and what should that be about? Because a lot of education podcasts are kind of just talking to other education leaders, not so much like prospective students, but I don't know. I guess it's a really broad question, but so going back to the broad question, who should start a podcast?
Yeah. I think the simple answer that I would give around this is anybody who wants to do a good job. I mean, I had the experience of having to if you don't want to commit to it and you're not really sure, then just don't do it, because there is work involved to do it right. And it does take a plan of action. And it can be super worth it to do that. But if you're if you're not ready to invest, then just kind of maybe not. But assuming you do want to, one of the things, I think it goes back to a lot of what we talked about. If your objectives are around, enrollment marketing and student recruitment, talk to students, highlight their stories, talk about the things that matter to them. And you have unlimited inventory. You can do as many episodes as you want to. So really drill down on specifics. It doesn't have to be, okay, tell me about your entire life. I mean, talk about specific programs, extracurriculars, courses, like all the things that we know students struggle with, how your school helped the student navigate the financial aid process, right? I mean, all the things that I might be concerned about if I'm a kid and I want to say, well, I don't know, this is a whole new world for me. And once I go out there, I'm not going to know what's going on. I'm a first generation college student. My family, doesn't know that much about what I'm going to encounter when I get there. And I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily know if I have a community to rely on. Tell me the stories that are going to help me feel like, yes, this is a place that knows and cares about me. Right. There also are other directions to go with them. I mean, it kind of depends on your objectives, but podcasts also are supercharged networking opportunities, aren't they? I mean, if you reach out to somebody and say, would you like to be on my podcast? That's a lot more interesting than let's set up a meeting. Mm-hmm. The people you can meet and connect with and learn from when you're doing it, in that you still want to be mindful of that the end result of the content is worthwhile and is serving a purpose. But There's so many creative ways to use the medium, but yeah, I would definitely think of it in terms of I need to hear from my peers. I need to hear from somebody who's relevant to me. So I don't need to hear the dean of, whatever telling me how great the school is. I want another student to tell me how great it is.
Right.
So, I would certainly start there.
Yeah, that's great. I was thinking about that too. That's a great idea for a podcast to just get other students who have been alumni or whatever, who have been successful and who have gone through challenges. When I was going, I remember when I was going from elementary school to middle school, I was so nervous, and my sister's 2 years ahead of me, and I was just peppering her with questions constantly. Like, what if I can't find my locker? What if I blah, blah, blah. What do I do if this happens? How do you get to the cafeteria? What do I do if and she would get so annoyed with me, but I'm like, that was me in high school getting ready to go away to college too. It's just like wanting to know from someone that's been there, what are the answers to these challenges, and in navigating big things for the first time, just being away from your parents, being, maybe paying for your own groceries for the first time, and managing your own schedule.
So with things like high school, right, I was kind of figuring it out, and then it got easier for each successive brother. And with college, my parents had gone to college, but they went at a time when you more or less applied to one school and went, right? It wasn't what it became later with the whole process. So completely different time of figuring it out. Eventually, you may figure it out, but you may realize, okay, my first year was kind of just like, I didn't know what I was doing. And then I figured it out eventually. You also may, but there are, serious, times when it may not happen that way, where a student comes in, they struggle their first year. Maybe they struggle so much academically that they end up out of school, or they run out of money, right? In the middle of their sophomore year. So now I've left school with debt and without a degree. Okay. And that was totally avoidable.
Right.
But because the school didn't anticipate, understand, and support that need. I mean, this of course goes beyond communications. This goes to their actual programs. But it is their obligation. If I'm going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars from you, it's my obligation to support your success. It's not a free for all here. And so I think that's when I was going back to kind of that, I'm referring to the middle class, the 4-year universities where tuition is up. And I mean, it should apply to every school, but to really think a lot harder about having a hand in that student's success more explicitly, rather than just saying, well, we have great faculty and great programs and anybody can, it is what you make of it kind of thing, right? Yes. For some people that'll totally work because they already know what they're doing, or they're super self-motivated, or they're driven, or they have a support system or whatever. But for most, it will not, because, most kids are 18, 19, 20, 21 and beyond, have not totally figured it out.
For sure. Yeah. So a lot of our listeners are marketing leaders, communications leaders, and I'm curious to know what goes into implementing vision. What are kind of conversations do you have with leaders when you talk about formulating and implementing vision?
Sure. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about, we always kind of think in terms of mission, vision, and values, and sometimes they all are there. Sometimes one or the other takes the place of the others, right? But realistically, when you think about it, it's like your vision it's your anticipated vision of the future, right? What you want society to look like, what you want life to be for your customers if you execute on your mission. It's the thing that can be the most compelling and can really keep people interested in what you're doing. And it really does start with that process of beginning with the end in mind and thinking about who am I meant to serve here? What is their situation currently? And what could it be like, or what do I wish it were like in the future if we're able to support them? And really illustrating that. And that's the thing, right, that guides your company as you go. The implementation piece is both internal and external, and internal first, really. It's that obligation, but also opportunity of the leadership to be communicative. That helps you earn buy-in around what you're doing. It helps your team members understand how they can positively contribute to success. So you're going to get the best out of them. And you're also going to, get some leeway when the results are ambiguous, because people know what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so it can work. So it's like that word transparency. I mean, that can be done strategically. There's certain things that people are not necessarily need to be privy to, but what it means is making your motivations transparent, making your intentions and your thought process transparent, so that others can learn from it. They can see what you're thinking. They can see why you are in the role that you're in, right? This person seems to have an idea here of what they're doing. And also kind of goes back to that point about breaking down those silos of, okay, these folks over here, these folks over there, they're not operating off the same information.
Right.
They're doing what they think is their job, but it's not really connected to what we're doing here as a whole. And and a lot of times I've seen it. I'll talk about one example. Communications and marketing, right? Now, a lot of people call it Marcom and they go together, but sometimes that's not really the case, right? Companies, they're not exactly working on the same team necessarily. So I've been in organizations where that do, and you're going to see this a lot in education, they do a variety of mission-oriented work, each of which, if you distill it down to its specific unit level, or its P&L area, is not necessarily revenue generating, right? Mm-hmm. There's organizations that engage in legislative advocacy, or they do other community programs and things like that. And then they also sell products, or they have conferences and events, or they, provide PD. I'm in organizations where it's like, you could look at the chart and the marketing department would just draw a big X through all of those things they defined as non-revenue generating and say, we don't have to support them, know about them, or care about them because we're here to sell product.
Yeah.
Well, why should I buy this product versus one of your competitors? I mean, that's part of your value proposition. It's part of your story, is to say, look, we're not exclusively focused on making money here by selling these things. We're doing all these things and they all support one another. This is the impact we make. Versus, communications often has more insight into all of those things and kind of synthesizes and blends them all together. Now, when it's working the way it should, both those units are doing that and working together. But, that's not necessarily the case. A lot of that comes from the top, right? That comes from the leadership creating those norms and expectations and assertions around what we're meant to do here. But if you're allowing a culture to kind of thrive whereby we're writing each other off and saying, well, you don't really bring in money, so you don't, it's not important. Well, then that's how it goes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. Where can people connect with you at?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, Ross Romano. You can search for me. I'm on Twitter at Ross B. Romano. And my website is septemberstrat.com, or you can also check out bpodcast.network to learn about the podcasting thing. So there's a lot going on there. But yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, I'm pretty easy to find, or email ross@septemberstrat.com.
Cool. Awesome. Ross, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Definitely go connect with Ross on LinkedIn, as he's got a lot of good content he puts out that will be relevant to our audience. In other news, 3 things I want to give you before you go. Number 1, if having a lot of student and alumni stories at your disposal is something that you would love to have, if you could just snap your fingers and have what you want, and if you want to have all that B-roll and build a big, massive B-roll and interview library of content that you can just dominate social media with, I've got something great for you with our student testimonial subscriptions. You've heard a bit about them already, so if you are interested in more information, including pricing, go to pricing.unveiled.tv. Unveiled is spelled UNVEILD. Number 2, if you want to take the storytelling you're already doing to the next level, I have a free resource for you. It's a 3-part framework for creating compelling student and alumni testimonials. You can get it at unveiled.tv/student testimonials. It doesn't even have to be for video. It works for written content, your next TED Talk, whatever. So go pick that up. Number 3, leave a review for this podcast. It helps us out a ton. Thanks for listening. My name is John Azoni. Go connect with me on LinkedIn. And in the meantime, I'll catch you on the next episode of the Higher Ed Storytelling University Podcast. Thanks.
Do you want to simplify your school's technology, save teachers time, and improve students' performance on state assessments? You can do it all, but don't waste another minute. Head straight to ixl.com/BE to learn how IXL's research-proven teaching and learning platform can help you achieve all of these goals. That's ixl.com/BE.